All right, everyone, welcome to Connected Conversations with Connected Leadership and your host, Nataliya Becker. We're here having real, no BS conversations about all things leadership, fulfillment, building high-performing team, and impactful businesses. And today, my guest is Josh Siegal. I made Josh, it's a LinkedIn friend come reality. When I met Josh, I was really drawn to his authenticity and his voice and his presence. I think we were in the same kind of network, maybe commenting on each other's posts, but then his views, the authenticity and vulnerability with which he shared really allowed me to connect to him as a person. And when I met him in person, I was like, I feel like we've known each other for lives now. Josh, why don't you do an intro for us of who you are, what you do? And I'm so excited we're here.
Well, Natalia, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me and hosting this conversation. Stoked to do this with you and to cut out all the BS and just have a really, really good talk about leadership, culture, and all of that fun stuff. For me, multi-time head of people, predominantly in the tech space, now acting as a fractional advisor for all things people, culture, HR, and organizational effectiveness. Having a ton of fun working with organizations across almost all industries, working in the mining space, the not-for-profit space, the tech space. So solving a lot of big challenges when it comes to effectiveness, culture, and people. So having a blast on that front. And I agree. It's so nice when LinkedIn connections can become real world connections and our shared love of yoga and fitness and good coffee. It just guarantees we're going to be friends for a very long time.
Yeah, and we happen to be neighbors pretty much.
The
10
West
minutes
End,
from each other.
West End,
Yeah,
Best
West
End.
End. Like that. I did not hear that before. Just so today we were hoping, we don't know where the conversation exactly going to go because it's no BS. So whatever it goes, it goes. But we were hoping to talk about building leadership teams for the next stage of growth, right? And so we both have worked in tech companies and with tech companies. But I think the principles really apply to anyone thinking about building a highly performing team, knowing that what would take the organization forward, that you can't do it on your own, right? So I think here the stage we're talking is kind of beyond, the first 0 to 1. Kind of, it's more either you're scaling or you're transforming, or I think you're at a stage where you know what you've done up to now is now going to get you where you want to go next. And so I want to start with this. How do you know you're going to change things up, all in all? Like, how do you know to get started?
Yeah, so I think it's multifactorial, and there's quantitative and qualitative elements. So the easy one is you're not hitting the targets that you want to set out for yourself, and you can then look at the business, the team, what you have in place, and identify the why behind missing those targets. I would say in a scaling organization, a large part of the time, it's the organization has outgrown the people that were there before, which causes that lag in results. That's the easy one. That's the quantitative one. And it's a little reactive, right? Because you've had the bad results and now you're reacting to it. Proactively, there's probably a formula that you could create to predict when those challenges are going to come into place. I'm a firm believer, and I've read this thought leadership before, so it's not my own. If you think about an organization from birth, so two humans in a garage with an idea, to we've gone through, we're now either a 100,000 person global company or we're exiting the business in some capacity. So end of the business. You could probably create an alphabet of A through Z. And as a leader, we're probably most effective for like 3 or 4 letters in that alphabet. So if you're a garage person, you're probably great from 0 to 1, 1 to 15, maybe 15 to 50. And then when you can't wrap your arm around it anymore, you're going to start to feel pain points. And you either need to massively evolve as a leader and change where your competencies are, or think about succession planning and being proactive to the needs of talent changing with the needs of the organization.
Right. So there's something interesting you're hitting on. And I think it's a little bit of leading versus lagging indicators. Like your missed KPIs would likely be lagging, and behaviors in competencies assessment right? What you can see now, thinking, would that actually add up to this? I'm going to be leading. So I guess as a founder or CEO or like any executives or any team manager, I think, right? If you want to be in proactive, you got to pay attention to how people and the skills, how they behave and what skills they have, and kind of evaluate it with the future, not even the current targets.
There's probably a really interesting study or activity that could be done to identify certain components of employee engagement that would correlate to those leading indicators that your talent is not up to snuff for the scale and size of your organization. Like, I bet if you took a sentiment of,
Yeah.
is my senior leadership team micromanaging? Probably a leading indicator that they're not comfortable with the size, scale, and scope of the organization. Um, there's definitely a nugget here for us to unpack and work through. Maybe build
My data
help leaders.
science brain right now is very active because I can really, and I'm putting this on my list to research because this is can be done, right? Like you have the engagement surveys, I'm sure. Again, maybe they're not as accessible, but theoretically, and you have the stages of organization and their results, right? So theoretically, you can map it out. But like for example, micromanaging, right? And you said people, who got you here might not get you there is kind of the conclusion, right? So you got to understand that, you're at that stage. And then what happens next? Like, do you fire everyone and start from scratch? That does not sound fun.
So I think
Oh,
there's a multitude of strategies to think through. One of the most powerful executive level conversations I ever had. One of the first tech companies I was working for, we were having our weekly leadership team meeting, and the CFO raised their hand and was like, listen, we're on the path to being a public company. I am not the CFO to be CFO of a public company the size that we're going to be. And we need to figure that out before we get there. And that either means big investments into me as the current CFO to level me up to get me ready for it, or
mhm.
a transition plan to bring in someone that has that skill set and capability. And then think about, do we either redeploy me in a different way or do I go move on to another opportunity? And I watched this executive really put himself out there and put his own job at risk. And I was like, wow, what selflessness, beautiful way of thinking about the organization. And he also mapped out the answer to your question on what do you do? And I don't think it's binary. I think there's a multitude of strategies to bring in, leveling up your people. So investing in your learning and development function, in mentorship, in coaching, certainly a strategy that all organizations should be deploying. Supplementing that with the injection of external talent. So folks that have done it before, understand the stage of business that you're going to be into so that they know the pain points, they can help mitigate them for you and supplement and complement your current leadership team is another meaningful strategy. It's why it's never too early to think about succession planning. Who's next?
Mm.
Are they internal? Are they external? What is your strategy around succession planning? And that'll educate a lot of the tactics that will fall out to make sure the organization is ready for the evolution they're inevitably going to go through.
Right. It's interesting because you're saying never too late to think about succession planning. And yet, when I coach leaders and executives, it's really not top of mind. And it's usually learned through the pain points or whether they either burn out or they can't accomplish what they want. And then it's like, oh, but do I have the bench strength? Do I have the number two ready? Do I actually, what if I need to stretch here now? Do I actually have someone who's ready to rise up? And usually it's like, well, if you haven't thought about it, like you don't.
And it's such a foundational piece of thinking about talent. Like you go back to the 1980s, Jack Welch, General Electric, where he implemented the succession planning rule where you can't be promoted unless you have two people ready to step into your role. So every single leader is thinking about how do I build the next generation of leader because my career is contingent on that. Like what a
Oh, I
beautiful
love it.
policy to put in place.
Right. Because it's thinking both ways. It's make sure you are ready next level and making sure your incentives are there to develop people. Because where does the micromanage right? Like going back to micromanagement, right? If I not too concerned about building out people, I'm like, I'll just give out tasks,
Yeah.
right? and I'll know exactly what they do, and I won't give them too much power because then I can control it and I know I'll do it the best with them, just kind of completing tasks. But what I realized, that would never allow me to actually, first of all, get the best out of people. Second, you're saying we're preventing them from saying that's not going to work for you long term. So that's a habit you need to start changing now.
Yeah, and to
Yeah.
your earlier point, it's interesting that for the most part, organizations only take succession planning seriously when there's an event that requires it. So, i.e., M&A activity. And it's like, oh no, we know we're going to have executives leaving, or we're going to have merging teams, or something along those lines. How do we now think about who can step up, who can be part of this large organization? We better do succession planning. Well, why not just have a lightweight template tool in place already? So you have the data at your fingertips. It becomes part of your talent management strategy. It becomes part of your performance management strategy. And it doesn't require heavy lift to do it. There's some really simple, elegant solutions that you can put in that gets your leaders thinking about building the next leaders.
So what is that solution? Remember, it's not BS. So if someone is listening and they're saying, "Oh shoot, we're not thinking about it," what would be like, a simple solution they can put it in place now?
I think if your organization is less than 100 people, you can do this easily in Excel or Google Sheets. List out the roles in your organization, rank them from a criticality perspective. What are the 10 to 15% mission critical roles in the org that if you don't have some form of thoughtful continuity in those roles, you're not going to be able to achieve your big strategic objectives? Narrow down your succession planning focus to those core critical roles, and then flesh out a plan. Ask a few questions. Do we have internal bench strength for this role? Yes, no. If yes, how ready is that bench to step up? What can we do to accelerate them stepping into it? If no, okay, well, we have a continuity challenge here. What are we doing to mitigate it? Are we building a talent pipeline externally through our talent acquisition team? Are we massively investing in some cross training for some brilliant people internally so they can start to get exposure to that area of the business? Just ensuring you have some sort of strategy and plan on paper that your senior leadership team can align to say, okay, our business is in good shape. If Nataliya ends up leaving us in the next 6 months, we know what to do. Like, Nataliya is great. We don't want her to leave, but we have some backup plan in place.
Right. And you know what I love about it? That it's kind of win-win immediately. Because let's say Natalia doesn't leave, but she was kind enough to build out the bench strength. You're already benefiting from the bench strength,
Well,
right? Like immediately.
and it immediately frees you up now to go do more strategic stuff. So if I'm
Yeah.
building my next generation leaders, well, that allows me to delegate more meaningful tasks, create more space for me. I can get further removed from the weeds, do more strategic work, add more value to the organization. In your beautiful words, it's a win-win. Like, everybody benefits by
Yeah.
having some sort of plan in place when it comes to succession planning.
Yeah. I find when I started my business, a lot of it was around resiliency for leaders. And, obviously, taking care of your health is really important. We know this. But number one way to actually be able to find time and be able to put your phone away during vacation and actually was build highly performing team under you. People, yes, it's a long term, it's not a 10-minute meditation that you feel like you did or a quick workout. No, but it's what would sustain and expand you in the future and actually make you successful.
Every time I've been enjoying work the most, and I can look back on the teams I had a right hand on my team who I knew I trusted utterly and completely, that if I needed them to step into any meeting, any engagement, any one on one in my place, I was like, it's in good hands. I can sleep at night. I can go on vacation. I feel good about that. And you don't just inherit those people. Like, you've got to find great people. You've got to empower them. You've got to give them the context and the skills to get them to
Mhm.
that level. But once you have that, like, true trusted right hand, like, wow, way more resilience, You have the ability to do your vacations and enjoy them. It is truly game changing. And if you're sitting in a leadership role right now and you can't definitively say, I trust Sarah to be my right hand and to step into this meeting for me, and you look around, you're like, ooh, I don't have someone like that. You need to build them immediately. That has to become
Yeah.
priority number one, or you're never extraditing yourself from the garbage at work.
Yeah. And fighting fires. We kind of jumped into like the people and building out the talent. Andrew, I want to also go back to, we talked about, you identify that you need a different way to behave, a different skill set, maybe different people, maybe level up the people you have. And then the question I have is, do you need to know exactly what you're doing next? So what comes first? Who or what? Right? So we have lots of thought leadership here and lots of different practices. And a lot of times at the executive level, we say, if you go back to like from good to great by Jim Collins, right? He also says who, not what. Because he says get people on the bus and good enough roles because you don't know always the exact direction where the bus is going to go because it might change because we live in an always changing world. And what we think what is right now, then we learn further down the road and we have to pivot. And so if people got on the bus because they were excited about this specific what, but specific roles, they won't be able to pivot with you and create kind of like the new what to be able to go ahead, right? Also, if you talk, to my guru, Patrick Lencioni, still my dream to meet him in person. Yeah. One day I hope he like messages or comments on
Patrick,
my
if you're watching
podcast.
this, Patrick
Yes.
Lencioni, watch this conversation, reach out to Natalia. You two should have a virtual coffee. I'm sure it'll be
Yes. Please, please. So if you remember his four disciplines, right, of organizational health, it's first creating the cohesive leadership team. And he talks more about not just, kind of competencies and competent for what you need, but also cohesive in terms of their behavior. And then creating this clarity of why, what exactly I would do and what I would do different than others, and how, and then over communicating and reinforcing that. And that's kind of like the four disciplines, in addition to obviously getting your marketing straight, your finance straight, and kind of the smart part of the organization. So you have this strong thought leadership. And yet, right, there is another one where sometimes when I coach leaders, I also tell them start with the why, then what, and only then who, so that you can match the people from what specifically needs to be done and you can be more unbiased actually in evaluating your talent, what you have now, and what is missing, what happens. So, how do you choose two opposing views?
So a lot to dig in there. And I know it's no BS conversations, but I'm going to give a little bit of BS in my answer because I think there is it depends, and it's not
Mhm,
entirely binary of choosing one or the other as your starting point. So let me see if I can position my thoughts in a way that will tell a solid narrative. So first and foremost,
mhm,
I agree with you. Why has to be fundamentally at the core of everything. Yuri Levine, the founder of Waze, multi-time unicorn founder, like this guy knows what he's doing from a tech startup perspective. He wrote a book called Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the
mhm,
Solution. And I think if you're going to have really, really good, smart, ambitious people, and you want them to pivot with you when you change direction, they have to be bought into the why. Otherwise, what am I pivoting towards? Like, I need to trust you and that we're going to solve a really meaningful problem in an impactful way. And if how we go about solving that changes along the route, I'll pivot with you if I'm bought into your why. That this is a
mhm,
powerful problem we have to solve. So I agree. Why at the core, I think gives you the flexibility and the malleability if you then rally people around that why. Beyond that, I think we can use succession planning actually as like a foundational conversation to talk about people versus what and when and how and why. Like, if you think of succession planning, there's kind of three different types of competencies you need to have as you work through it. There's the core competencies, their ability to communicate, their ability to collaborate, the things that just make you fundamentally a good employee, regardless of the function that you have. Those core competencies, sure, layer in the people first before you figured out the what, and I think you're great. Similarly to the leadership competencies, you're going to need people that can lead through influence. So it doesn't necessarily mean direct reports, that can coach, that can mentor. No matter what your what is, you're going to need people with those competencies. So amazing. Bring in great leaders. For the technical competencies, I do think you need to have some grounding in the what before you bring in your people. So, for example, if we're going to solve challenges around global poverty, and we have a hypothesis that there's a tech solution around money movement that can help us do that, well, we're going to need folks that are technically competent in anti money laundering and understanding financial markets and all of those things. And I can't find those people until I'm grounded in the what we're going to do. So, yes, bring in great leaders, great communicators, great collaborators, have that. But I do think you need to figure out a bit of the what when you're bringing in technical folks that are going to help you solve specific problems.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a dance.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit level dependent too, right?
Yes.
Because the further down you go, the more technical you'll get. You better know what people need to actually do, right? So I think there is a little bit change in how far you go. I would say, right, and again, Patrick Lencioni, if you're listening, right, he always says, always hungry, hire people who are hungry, right? So they're ready to learn always, right? People who are smart, and he more talks about emotional intelligence smart. So they know how to work with people, they know how to influence, they know how to communicate, right? Hungry, smart, and humble, right? So they're coachable. So, right. So, in a way, this is what you're referring, this kind of core competencies, or almost, I think, almost values. I know the values conversations sometimes is a word used, but that to me is kind of values. And you're saying if you hire people like this in the first place, you don't have to worry about morale. You don't have to worry as much about productivity because their internal drive, right? Even outside of the long term compensation packages and so on, their internal drive does not take anything less than excellence and impact, right? And it is truly independent where you're going. And so I think determining that first is really important. Yet, the way I think about it, I say, well, but people do care about what? Because that impacts their learning, their growth, even the people who are hungry for learning. So the way I kind of think about it is if you right away saying we're hiring for these core competencies that include that curiosity, flexibility, commitment to impact, likely if you hire for somewhat specific what, they will be able to pivot and be with you. And I think the what can be determined in stages. It doesn't have to be all prescribed. So I think like let's say we climb the mountain. And at this point, based on what I know the best, like imagine I have a headlamp. I only see at this level. This is what I see. But I gotta pick a direction now. As soon as we start climbing the mountain, just we got a little elevation, I can see completely different view that I couldn't see from that elevation, right? And something new will become. So I think, and that's how we keep climbing. So it's like, we put some strokes now, and then as we move, the strokes are going to either become more detailed or we might see completely something new. And pivot doesn't mean that the direction was wrong where we started. So I think you can kind of start with I have the people who I think now I'm going to invest in behaviors of cohesive team because I want to make sure we're able to have good, healthy conflict to help determine what we think the what is. And then we're going to, rebalance the bus for it, where the people are going to go, the people. Then we're going to start going and then we're going to revisit the conversation on the what together again. So I think if it's like, it's a continuous process.
Well, and to the earliest part of our conversation, talking about how
Yeah,
organizations evolve over time, I
yeah,
think this concept becomes more pronounced depending on the stage of the organization. So earlier stage, you're going to have more generalists where those core
right,
competencies and the leadership competencies are much more important. You fundamentally just need good humans and they're all going to do a little bit of everything and you're going to figure it out as you go. As an organization becomes much more mature, like think about a big bank, you need that deep specialization and those technical skills become more and more important. And you probably have enough practices in place to manage some of that other stuff around team effectiveness and team dynamics. And I need you to now be that technical expert and go deep. And understanding that paradigm as organizations grow, shift, and evolve, I think it changes the discussion and the focal point based on org maturity.
right. Yeah, I agree. And I don't think it's like the BS answer. It depends. It's more, is really why we need to think hard about those decisions.
Totally.
Like, I also, that's why people hire a coach or they hire an advisor to think about what is that way. Because if there was one playbook and one instruction, everyone would be able to do it. Everyone would be paid big bucks, right? But it's not. It is ambiguous. And it is, there's different viewpoints and different ways to go about it depending on your specific situation and I think the level. So why don't we talk also about, we talked about the, so you got people who you think right now you need on the bus with some, strategy. Like what is this cohesive team we're talking about? What is that for you? How do you help organizations build it? What is that?
Well, so at the end of the day, it all comes back to delivering on the needs of the business. So
Yeah.
my background, like, yes, I've spent the past dozen years in people and culture, but before that, I was on the commercial side of the business. So it was about driving revenue, EBITDA, profitability. So essentially, it's how do we get the people resources we need in place to deliver on the business strategy that you want to deliver against, and that fundamentally means different things for different organizations. So, starting with the business problem, what are we looking to build? Are we looking to build a 40 to 60% year over year growth company that's focused more on customer acquisition and nonstop growth? Or are we looking to build a profitable lifestyle business that's going to generate a certain amount of income every single year? And there would be a different strategy and a different team I would put in place for those particular outcomes. So sitting down with the founders, the executive leaders, saying, what's the goal? Where do you want to be in 12 months? What do you want your business to look like? How do you want to be working together? And then really curating a talent acquisition strategy, a talent management strategy, an organizational effectiveness strategy to deliver against their specific, unique needs and wants.
Right. So that's for, how do the pieces end up? At the end, we're there to drive the business. But I like how you said, listen, what do you want this to be? Is this, if it's, you gotta promise some returns, is this lifestyle business? That's like a question that I would say should be answered before your recruitment, right? Because that's why if you're recruiting me, that's something I need to know what your vision is. Kind of going back to the why and some at least what before who, right? Because if we're misaligned on this very fundamental dynamics and the growth and vision of the business, it's very unlikely we're going to be able to drive the bus in the same direction. So I think alignment, start with alignment. I want to also talk about like the specific, cohesion of the leadership team. So I call it a star problem. Like you went out now and you hired the best of the best, you think, the people who are, aligned in your values, people who bring the expertise that you really need to complement your own, are smarter than you in many ways, all A stars, like the same thing, you see in sports, draft them, right? So the best we could find for the role. And then you bring together and you put the superstars in the ring. And you're like, okay, let's grow the business, right? And then what I find happens is, wait, just because you hired A stars, it doesn't mean that the A stars start working away that gets actually the best sides of them and the wisdom in the room, especially if they're all high performers, right? It's almost, I find the opposite happens because this is people who are used to, I'm the driver, I'm going to get it done. And kind of like, used to almost a little bit of competition where for true wisdom to come up and leverage everyone's expertise and diversity of thought, you need this true way, very safe way for people to participate, to comment on each other expertise, even though I'm like not tech, I'm marketing, and things like that, to arrive to a well thought out decisions on the strategy and people and so on.
Well, you talked about sports teams. You could take, let's
Yeah,
use basketball, the 5 greatest basketball players in the world, put them on the floor together, but if they don't have a common operating system or a playbook that they're working through together, they're not gonna be an effective team. In the
yeah,
corporate world, to me, this is a combination of your culture and your organizational rhythm. How do we come together? How do we communicate? How do we plan? What is that cadence? And what is everyone's role throughout that? You need to be prescriptive in what that looks like. Otherwise, your superstars come in and they're brilliant. So they have a million and one ideas and they're creative and they're thinking this way and they're doing that, but they're not operating within a joint system that brings their skills and their expertise together. So thinking about what is our organizational rhythm? When do we come together and plan? How do we build the trust and candor so I can challenge your functional plan and say, hey, listen, it seems like there's some contingencies there where you might need my function, but I've got priority A, B, and C. How do I deliver what you need and still have these priorities? Where do we rationalize? What does that look like? And if you don't have the processes and the cadence in place to create the space for those types of planning sessions, your A players are going to get super frustrated. They're not going to be able to deliver what A players should deliver. And they'll either no longer be A players or they'll leave your organization and find a place that has the playbook that allows
right,
them to thrive as a type of contributor they want to be.
right. So again, let's get specific here, right? Like, I got a team. What do I do? Like, what does that playbook look like? So you said, I love it. Like, how do we meet? This is how we meet. You know, on quarterly basis, we do an offsite where we do strategic work, right? And we don't talk strategy. We make big decisions. On monthly basis, we have this meeting where we debate big decisions or see if there's anything on strategy, or we look at our KPIs to see if we're tracking towards our goal. And those KPIs could be data, could be behaviors. Every week, we're meeting on tactical things. We're looking at our dashboard. We're discussing projects and making sure that we are resolving anything that's not moving ahead. Maybe every day we're connecting and just like a quick check-in, right? So like your meetings. Then you set roles and responsibilities. I feel like this one needs to come back because I feel like there was at least I've lived through at least, I don't know, 7 teams. I'm not kidding, just in the last 3 years, who thought that roles and responsibilities is an old concept, meaning like, but we're all collaborating, it's all shared responsibility, it's all shared accountability, and the rules kind of make sense. But no. And that's when tech thinks they're determining what features to build and product, and it's implicit, which ruins the team dynamics. So
Yeah,
I always say make implicit explicit. So what are roles and responsibilities? Let's agree that we all agree on that who's making what decisions. And then also, how do we communicate? What's accepted? Like if I'm really excited about something and I start yelling about it in a meeting because that's how, sometimes express, but it's 100% unacceptable by you, Josh. You shut down and you think this is like unacceptable behaviors. You're not going to be able to have a good conversations if we didn't talk about it.
totally. I am on the roles and responsibility piece. I think there's two tools that I love that I think are really helpful for organizations, especially scaling organizations. So in the entrepreneurial operating system, they have something called accountability charts,
Yeah.
where it clearly articulates for every single role in the organization, what do you have accountability over? So if I'm new to a company and I'm like, who do I go to if I'm onboarding a new partner? I can go into the accountability chart, search for partnerships, and boom, I know the person who has ownership over this particular item. And it creates clarity for every single employee to know where decisions are made and how they're made. I think that's great. There's another tool called Glass Frog, which is through the holocracy system, does something very similar in a scalable way. Again, searchable, give your employees the ability to like quickly identify who's accountable for what. Super, super important. And then the other piece that you were talking on there that I think is really important around communication style. Yes, make it explicit. Like Shopify, for example, very, very much a written communication organization. If you have an idea or something you want to drive, document it. Here's the process on how you share it to get broader insights around your idea. And then there's particular forums where we come and we discuss and we challenge and eventually align. Different organizations are going to have different ways on how they do that, but make sure you find a way that works for your org. Otherwise, to your point, you could have the most brilliant minds that maybe are a little quieter and not as comfortable speaking up in meetings. You're not getting the full leverage of the capabilities that they could bring.
Yeah. And it's agreement, right? Like that's how we share ideas. We have a document that gets sent out the night before. Then we have a debates meeting where everyone brings their questions. Then this is how we make, this is who's responsible for the decision here. Here's the things that are important to this decision. And this is when we plan to make a decision and why, right? Because if that doesn't exist, you end up in this decision making non-ending wheel and people get disengaged. They're not listening. They're actually missing things, right? And they don't know how to participate because you never invited them or it wasn't the way that works for them or just wasn't communicated because they thought that to make decision they got to show up to this presentation and that you will book a one-on-one meeting with them. They didn't realize you needed to be here and you needed to read this, right? So make it explicit. What are the ways how you are running, how you're communicating? Are you communicating over email? What do you expect people to do over email versus Slack versus Teams? How do you what's some mindsets you all want to adopt, right? Like for example, the big one I talk about is feedback. That we're like IU culture feedback is that the immediate feedback. What does that mean? How do you make sure you don't take things personally? Like, is that part of the culture that you give each other feedback or you ask for feedback? Was it not? Because if it's not and it comes to me and I didn't expect it, I might feel attacked and then I go into the defensive and that goes all the wrong way and ruins relationship versus it's supposed to be part of the learning and curiosity muscle we keep building.
We could probably have an entire conversation on employee engagement and the impact that this has on it. But you said it so well. If you want to disenfranchise, disconnect, and disengage your highest performers, frustrate them when it comes to making decisions. Don't make it explicit. And like you're going to have these brilliant people that know what to do in the business feeling paralyzed, feeling frustrated because they don't actually know how to get ideas over the finish line because you haven't figured out how to work as an organization. It is horrifically frustrating for people that want to make impact.
I want to reemphasize that point again because it's not about ping pong tables that's going to raise your engagement levels. I'm sorry. I just in the last 6 months, I worked with 3 organizations where I was able to see some of the engagement results, right, from the people. And the main always comes is slow decision making. One of the most frustrating points, and it's 100%, right, of how do we make decision and get into discipline of good decision making because we also don't want to be in this let's just make a decision because people like make decisions. No, how do you make decisions where you heard all the points and wisdom from everyone? If you remember that everyone carries with them a piece of the puzzle, how did you put it together? That's where I think the candor comes in. This is where you got to build trust. This is where you got to be able to have healthy conflict, right? So this is what I help teams with is how do you create environment and routines and personal commitments to having and being able to share and engage in healthy conflict. Then afterwards you make a decision, not a consensus, just to keep everyone happy. A real decision. Sometimes it's a consensus, sometimes it's not.
It's interesting when it comes to decision making, the first time founders that I've worked with over the years, I find they very typically have one of two diametrically opposed problems. One, they are way too slow and spend way too much time overanalyzing before making a decision, and they end up paralyzing the organization, which creates massive frustration. Or their heads go back and forth so fast, shiny object syndrome, they're making too many decisions too quickly, not giving their employees stable ground to work on, and then get frustrated when their employees can't deliver, but you've actually never actually given your employees an opportunity to deliver because you've changed
Mhm.
direction too quickly. And it's typically one of those two decision-making styles that absolutely corrupt employee engagement, break down the culture, and leaves people very, very frustrated.
Yeah. I a couple of shameless plugs here. So first of all, you talked about EOS, like one of the tools of EOS. If anyone is listening where they are in the stage of the company where they need an operating system, I'm a big fan of EOS. I really think if you have EOS is a kind of given for you system to run a well-run business. Just, with the strategy, with the big rocks, with the commitment breaking down, with the accountability, with assessment that helps you to understand your talent couple that's already made for you. So if anyone is listening, reach out if you need a resource for that. I'm happy to recommend. I worked with a couple of EOS implementers and always thought that it was a really well thought out system that works. I think they go up to like 300 people
Yeah.
on the in the company. The other plug I wanted to say was, so we talked about accountability. Oh, is assessments, right? Things like I'm a big fan of everything disc as a simple one. EOS does COBOL. There's tons. Almost doesn't matter which one you do, but in my opinion, do something. Give people a tool to understand what are some of their biases, like this, like what you said. Oh my God, I didn't realize that I impact this way. People that I'm more like a shiny, I have this shiny object syndrome, and why that is the case, and how much I am like that compared to others, and who can I leverage on the team to balance it out, right? And look at your team. Take any assessment, put your team together and see, okay, how is the team? Because if all of your team are risk takers, right? Then sorry, no shit, you have problems with mistakes, operational, you can't deliver, and you're constantly going different directions, right? And the opposite is true. If you ended up, you needed some, more, maybe you're in a regulatory environment, or you were in a stable environment for a long time, and a lot of your people are more operational, more systematic thinking, more oriented towards process, are less of risk taker. No wonder you're having a hard time transforming or growing or pursuing new territories, right? And you want to know about it. You want to talk about it. Who is able to stretch where? Because a lot of things can be learned, right? But you can't unless you know it. And where you leader stretch the team.
Well, and the beautiful thing, to your point, regardless of the assessment you pick, if you deploy it consistently, it gives your team common language to understand each other, communicate with each other, and also hold each other accountable. So if we do a DISC assessment and we find out that Josh isn't great at collaborating, at least I can articulate that to the broader team and we can put strategies in place to mitigate that, hold me accountable to doing it
Right.
better, whatever the case may be. So the more opportunities you have to create common language amongst teams, the better.
Yeah. So common language is one. The other thing is the building trust component, right? If we're all high performance and we're coming in and we're like, well, I'm high performer, you're high performer. Any question you ask, I'm going to pretend I know the answer, or I'm going to pretend like I don't have weaknesses. I'm kind of like the all star here. Then when you bring a proposal and I see that likely it's not going to work, there's a perspective that I hold, I'm not going to say it, or I'm going to say it and you're going to dodge it back at me, right? And we're not going to have a good conversation. And then, I always say, people die because someone wasn't able to speak up. Like, think about all the wrong launches and things like that, where engineers on the team or people on the team knew it wasn't going to work. But because they weren't able to speak up, because they didn't feel comfortable, or, you know, they were shut down because, hey, we can't show our weaknesses, we can't talk about mistakes, we can't challenge each other, right? There was actual consequences, not just on business, but on people's lives. And so even assessment is actually a very safe way for people to start this conversation that, hey, we're all humans. We can't be perfect. I can't be strong at everything. I need the team's help. That's why teams are stronger together. That's why they can become more of their parts. Otherwise, if we're all pretending that we can do all, right, we will never become more than the sum of our parts.
Well said. Very
So
well said.
so that's the leadership team. Now, how do we scale this down? Now, how does this? We kind of went from why to who, how, when we start leadership team to then, okay, what's about the rest of the organization? How does this trickle down?
Yeah, I think having the right practices in place and then leading by example is the absolute key. So when you think about your talent management practices, put in the lightweight practices that are easy for leaders to deploy downstream. So if you're going to do performance management, yeah, start at the top, have candid conversations about your leaders and their capabilities, and role model with them how they should do it with their direct reports. Make it simple, make it easy to understand, make it lightweight from an administrative burden perspective, strip away the excuses, and help people understand the why around why it's so important and why it's an integral part of their job. Doing things like having basic job leveling matrices or matrices and saying you as a senior manager, the expectation is you're going to build the next generation of talent. You're going to deploy these talent management practices to your teams and actually making it explicit that doing these things is part of your job as a leader. That's how you drive scale. It's never going to be the HR function that figures out how to scale these things. It has to be the leaders in the business saying, we believe in these items. We understand why they're important. You've made it easy for us to scale it through processes, systems, training, whatever the case may be, and then empower them to own it.
Mm. Right. And I love that you're saying remove any excuse and any burden. Because as soon as it's become like this HR performance management cycle, you lost it.
Yeah.
You lost it. That's
Like,
it.
what's the point? Like, don't overcomplicate things that don't have to be complicated.
Right. Yeah. Look behind of what we've done. Remember that we're here to learn and get better and we want to achieve great results. So let's look the data from behind. Let's talk about it. Where do you want to get better? Where do I see you get better? Where does everyone else think how you're creating impact? And then let's look forward. What do you want? Where's the organization going? How do we help you to get there? What are you willing to do? How committed are you? Are you still on board with this organization? Are you happy? Okay, let's keep on the bus. That's what it is.
Simple, simple, simple questions that have really big impact if you ask them from a place of caring.
Yeah. Questions and conversations, because that's where kind of hurts me when I hear people and leaders kind of like really have this energy of like, oh, I gotta have the conversation. It's like, no, the conversation is the main piece. It's not about this system. That's the conversation. That's how you motivate your people. It's through having this conversation. That's how you keep the strategy alive, the culture alive. It's through this conversations. I love it. For me, the other thing that I think about when I think of the rest of the organization is this idea of values and behaviors because people start all excited. I find the whole values work is often, I guess, overvalued in a way because people get together, they create the shiny values, they sound so good, they print them on the walls. But to me, values are the lived behaviors that are consistently discussed and are linked to the reward systems, to the incentive systems, and that are constantly tested against. So for me, as when I facilitate anything around values, I right away say, okay, let's take the value now. Give me 5 examples how you live it right now in the organizations from the team you manage in this team. Now find 5 examples where you didn't live it and what do we do about it? And is it true? And then when we say that, hey, actually we don't live this value, take it out. Right? Like the common example is like professional services firm, for example. I was leading their offsite. We talked about values, and one of their values was work-life balance. Right?
Were they living it?
No, and that's when I said take it out. Like it was a really big discussion. Like because that's the thing. You're then hiring wrong people and then struggling with this wrong people.
And if people are looking at your values and say, this is inauthentic, this is not who we are, they're not going to believe any of it. So you've lost credibility with the
Oh,
organization. So trust is broken, your talent strategy is broken. You have to authentically own who you are. And if you don't like who you are, make the changes, but a
oh,
poster on the wall is not going to drive those changes. You
yeah.
need to have commitment as a leadership team that we believe this is important. We're going to hold people accountable to it. And when the rubber hits the road, if I have a high performer but they're not living a value that I say is mission critical for the business, what do we do about it? Are we willing to exit them even though it'll cost us money? That's a value, something that
Yeah.
I hold dear that I'm willing to make trade-offs to protect.
Yeah. And it's amazing the ripple effect on such decisions. On one of the teams we had, someone had to be exited, and it was phenomenal the positive ripple effect it had. How many things it signaled. Because then other executives on the team started looking at their teams and taking it way more seriously. And there's other exits that happen. And the person that was exited, the people on their team started rising up and their behavior started shifting because you actually did what you said you would do. Not that was just written beautiful on the wall, right? All right. I think we've had a rich conversation here. Josh, let's imagine this interview at some point goes viral. What is the message that you want to leave the world with?
Oh, that's an easy one. If anyone listening to this conversation knows Patrick Lencioni, get him in touch with Nataliya ASAP. Boom. Nothing else matters. Mission critical. Um,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
that is true, but multiple things can be true at the same time. So, the other thing that I would love for leaders to really think about is, are you creating an environment within your business that allows brilliant, high performing people to thrive? And if you can't definitively say yes, what are you going to do to change that?
Mm, beautiful. Thank you, Josh. I'll leave one message for me. And my brand is called, for YouTube channel is Connected Leadership. And it comes from the fact that I feel we're in epidemic of disconnection. And so my message to everyone is always to connect with you, to who you are and to others. And always right now we have a lot of separation in this world. And I want always to call everyone out to say, be the unity and the connection you want to see in the world. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening. Josh, I will put in the links where to find you. Thank you.